Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we're taking a deep dive into one of history's most, well, chilling and complex figures, Adolf Hitler.
Mm,
You've provided us with a fascinating stack of sources, encyclopedic entries, documentary transcripts, all sorts of things.
right.
And our mission is really to distill the most important nuggets, the key insights, offering you a shortcut to, understanding the man and his impact.
That's right. And what's truly illuminating in these sources, I think, is how they let us move beyond just the public figure.
Yeah.
We can trace some of the lesser-known personal details,
Mm.
the influences, the specific circumstances that, well, shaped his path, ultimately leading to catastrophe.
So we'll look at his origins, his rise, those final days.
Exactly. His origins, the dramatic rise to absolute power, and yeah, those final desperate days in the bunker, all through the lens of this material.
So let's dive in. What really stands out when we look at the life of the man who plunged the world into World War II? What's striking right away in the sources is that far from being some kind of destined leader, his early life reveals a very different picture, unformed almost. Let's delve into those roots first.
Indeed. Our sources, they reveal Adolf Hitler was born April 20th, 1889, Braunau am Inn, Austria, Hungary.
Okay.
His father, Alois Hitler, he was actually an illegitimate child. Initially used his mother's surname, Schicklgruber.
Schicklgruber, right.
I remember reading that. Yeah, only took the name Hitler years later. And this uncertain lineage, his father's late legitimization, it maybe offers an early glimpse into, the complex family dynamics that might have shaped him.
And his childhood sounds incredibly difficult. The sources mention these intense father-son conflicts. They must have been formative, right?
Precisely. His father, Alois, was apparently very strict, a disciplinarian, often resorted to beatings, the sources say, while his mother, Clara, tried to shield him. And Adolf, conversely, seemed determined to be the opposite of whatever his father wanted.
A reaction then.
Very much so, it seems. And then his younger brother, Edmund, died in 1900. That deeply affected him. Transformed him, apparently, from a confident student into this morose, detached boy. His own sister even recalled Adolf being a teenage bully. So this intense, conflict-ridden upbringing, it perhaps gives us an early glimpse into pressures that might have fueled, well, a deep-seated rebellion, a desire for control later on.
So a tough upbringing, clearly. How did that translate into his education, his early career plans, or lack thereof?
Well, he didn't finish secondary school. That became a significant hurdle later.
Right.
In 1907, he moved to Vienna, financed by orphans' benefits, his mother's support, wanted to study fine art.
The artist ambition.
Yeah, but he was rejected
Twice.
by the Academy of Fine Arts, Vienna.
Twice. Okay.
The director suggested architecture, but he lacked the academic credentials. He hadn't finished school, remember?
Oh.
The sources actually describe him during this time as a tired stray dog looking for an owner. No professional training, refused to take a regular job,
So what did he do?
lived in homeless shelters, apparently, or even on the streets for periods. It paints a picture of a really directionless, unmoored young man.
It's fascinating, that early volatility. Now let's turn to one of the most debated aspects, his anti-Semitism. How and when did that truly begin to form, according to what we have here?
Yeah, this raises a really important question, because the sources present conflicting accounts.
Okay.
Some, like his friend August Kubitschek, claimed he was a confirmed anti-Semite, even before leaving Linz.
So very early on then.
That's what Kubitschek claimed. But other historians describe that claim as problematical. Hitler himself, in Mein Kampf, said he first became an anti-Semite in Vienna. But Reinhold Hannisch, who knew him well then, disagreed with that timing.
So conflicting eyewitness accounts, too.
Exactly. Historians now generally agree that his notorious, murderous anti-Semitism really solidified well after Germany's defeat in World War I. Largely as a product of that paranoid stab-in-the-back explanation for the loss.
So it wasn't innate, necessarily, but more a reaction, fueled by that myth.
That's what the consensus suggests, yeah. It highlights how these societal narratives, even baseless ones, can be weaponized,
Yeah.
especially in times of crisis,
Yeah.
to fuel extremist ideologies.
That makes a lot of sense. Which brings us to World War I. That seems to have been a truly pivotal moment for him, especially volunteering as an Austrian citizen for the Bavarian army.
It was absolutely a defining period, and the sources note it was likely just an administrative error that let him serve in the Bavarian army.
Just slipped through the cracks.
Seems like it. He was posted as a dispatch runner on the Western Front, spent nearly half his time at regimental HQ, well behind the front lines.
Not exactly frontline infantry then.
Not primarily, no. Despite that, he was decorated for bravery, received the Iron Cross, second class, in 1914,
Okay.
and later the Iron Cross, first class in August 1918. That was a rare award for his rank, an enlisted man.
And wasn't it recommended by a Jewish officer?
That's right. Notably recommended by his superior, Lieutenant Hugo Gutmann, who was Jewish. A point often highlighted.
He was also wounded, right? And gassed. Those experiences must have profoundly shaped him.
Yes, definitely. October 1916, wounded in the left thigh, Battle of the Somme, and then October 1918, temporarily blinded in a mustard gas attack.
Must have been terrifying.
Absolutely. He described the war later as the greatest of all experiences. His wartime service undeniably reinforced his German patriotism, his nationalism.
So it's after the war, then, that this stab-in-the-back myth becomes absolutely crucial for his developing ideology. How did that grievance really take hold?
He was profoundly shocked by Germany's capitulation, November 1918. Like many German nationalists, he fervently believed the Durchschlusslegion, the stab-in-the-back myth.
This idea the army wasn't beaten but betrayed.
Exactly. This toxic narrative claimed the army, undefeated in the field, was betrayed on the home front by civilian leaders, Jews, Marxists, the usual scapegoats. And this baseless grievance began to intensely shape his ideology. It led to his earliest known written statement on the Jewish question by September 1919.
And what did that say?
It argued for, quote, the removal of the Jews altogether.
Wow. That early on, putting it in writing?
It shows how quickly that personal trauma, the national humiliation, and a convenient scapegoat could fuse into a genocidal political aim.
That deep-seated grievance, rooted in a myth, certainly became a foundational pillar, didn't it? Transforming belief into a political weapon.
Well,
So, after the war, he joins what becomes the Nazi Party. How does he go from this obscure individual to a national leader?
he joined the German Workers' Party, the DAP, in 1919.
Okay.
There he met Dietrich Eckart, who became his mentor, kind of guided him.
An influential figure early on.
Yes, and to broaden its appeal, the DAP changed its name. National Socialist German Workers' Party,
Yeah.
NSDAP, the Nazi Party.
Right.
Hitler himself designed the party's banner, that iconic swastika in a white circle, red background.
Created the brand, essentially.
Pretty much. And by February 1921, he was already remarkably effective at crowd manipulation. Gained notoriety for these rowdy, polemic speeches
Rank 2, mainly.
against the Treaty of Versailles, rival politicians, Marxists, and especially consistently Jews. This early skill in captivating and frankly inflaming crowds was absolutely key to his ascent.
So after the party's formation, the sources bring us to the infamous beer hall putsch. What was the real significance of that, beyond just the failed coup attempt?
Right. November 1923, he tried to seize power in Munich. It failed spectacularly.
Yeah.
He was arrested for high treason, sentenced to 5 years of fortress confinement, Landsberg prison, though he only served just over 1 year.
Fortress confinement sounds almost privileged.
Well, what's fascinating is that despite the failed coup, he received pretty friendly treatment. Mail from supporters, regular visits from party comrades. And it was during this relatively comfortable imprisonment that he wrote Mein Kampf.
Ah, that's where he wrote it.
Yes. So this episode, paradoxically, raised his profile, gave him a platform, a sense of martyrdom almost. It laid the groundwork for future political action rather than ending his ambitions.
The Great Depression, then, must have just created incredibly fertile ground for extremist parties like the Nazis.
Oh, absolutely.
Yep.
The stock market crashed in the U.S., October 1929. It had dire impacts in Germany, millions unemployed, banks collapsing, chaos.
Perfect storm.
Exactly. Hitler and the Nazi Party capitalized on this emergency, promised to repudiate Versailles, strengthen the economy, provide jobs, simple answers to complex problems.
And people were desperate.
They were. From late 1929, the Nazis began to gain significant popular support. Second largest party by September 1930, 18% of the vote.
And then?
Then the largest party in July 1932, 37%. A huge leap. It was a classic example of exploiting national crisis for political gain.
But despite that massive vote share, President Hindenburg initially refused to appoint him chancellor. What changed? What finally got him in?
That's a crucial point, yeah. July 1932, Nazis are the largest party. Hitler demands the chancellorship. Hindenburg says no.
Why?
Concerns about the increasing violence from the SA, the party's paramilitary brown shirts. Hindenburg was wary.
Understandable.
But the sources really emphasize this. Hitler and the Nazis' rise to power was not inevitable.
It wasn't.
No, it was a result of, a confluence of timing, desperate circumstances, and crucial backroom dealing.
Oh, the political maneuvering.
Exactly. Hindenburg and a small circle of right-wing anti-democratic politicians thought they could control Hitler, use him for their own ends.
It's a dangerous gamble.
A disastrous one, as it turned out. On January 30th, 1933, he was finally appointed chancellor. It was a political gamble that backfired spectacularly.
So Hitler as chancellor, what did that appointment truly mean for Germany's fragile democracy at that moment?
It signaled the beginning of the end. Simple as that. The Weimar Republic's constitution was still technically in effect on January 30th, 1933. But Hitler and the Nazi leaders immediately started exploiting every opportunity, every legal loophole to transform Germany into a dictatorship. Ruthlessly efficient.
So the dismantling started right away.
Immediately. And the power grab was complete in August 1934 when Hindenburg died.
Right.
A new law then combined the offices of president and chancellor. That granted Hitler absolute dictatorial powers. No legal or constitutional limits left on his authority.
Gone. Just like that.
It highlights how easily democratic institutions can be dismantled from within, when power is consolidated without checks and balances.
So with absolute power now, what were Hitler's immediate priorities? What were his foreign policy objectives as laid out in the sources?
Well, in a meeting with military leaders, February 1933, just days after becoming chancellor, he spoke chillingly of conquest for Lebensraum, living space in the East, and its ruthless Germanization. That was his ultimate foreign policy objective, stated right then.
Lebensraum.
Well,
already central.
Absolutely. And he quickly prioritized military spending over unemployment relief. His broader aims included Anschluss, annexing Austria, restoring Germany's 1914 borders, rejecting the Versailles Treaty's military restrictions, reclaiming former colonies in Africa, and establishing a German zone of influence in Eastern Europe.
An aggressive agenda from day one.
No question. It makes it clear his ambitions were set on aggressive expansion from the very beginning of his role.
And we see him acting on these ambitions almost immediately, don't we?
Indeed. Germany reoccupied the demilitarized Rhineland in March 1936. Direct violation of the Versailles Treaty, big risk, but it paid off.
Boosted his standing.
Massively.
Yeah.
He also sent troops to Spain to support Franco during the Spanish Civil War. Used it as a testing ground for his new military, the Luftwaffe especially.
Right, Guernica.
Exactly. Then by August 1936, responding to an economic crisis caused by all this rearmament, he ordered the implementation of a 4-year plan, explicitly to prepare Germany for war, envisioning this all-out struggle against what he termed Judeo-Bolshevism.
So war was always the goal.
This rapid rearmament and militarization starkly demonstrates his commitment to war, yes.
It's a surprising detail, though, that he was named Time magazine's Man of the Year in 1938, especially given what was clearly coming. What does that tell us about global perception, then?
It's jarring, isn't it? It's an indication of his perceived global impact at the time, for good or ill. He was undeniably shaping events.
But ironically...
Ironically, yes. The sources tell us he was actually angered by the Munich Agreement in September 1938, the one that handed over the Sudetenland to Germany without a fight.
Angered.
He won. He called it a diplomatic defeat because it denied him the war he actually sought in 1938.
He wanted war then.
Apparently. He saw Munich as limiting British power, just enough to pave the way for his eastern expansion later. It reveals a critical insight. His primary goal wasn't just territory, it was conflict itself. Even diplomatic victories were frustrating if they delayed war.
We've touched on his anti-Semitism evolving. How do the sources describe its transformation from, say, rhetoric into explicit systematic policy once he had power?
The sources are pretty clear. They describe him as pathologically anti-Jewish, emphasize his belief in a Jewish race that was parasitic, a contamination of the Aryan bloodline, horrific stuff.
Yeah.
He famously called Jews poisoners of nations. And even his political testament, his final words almost, reiterated his implacable resistance to the poisoners of all peoples, international Jewry.
So no softening, ever.
None. And the sources make it undeniably clear he was aware of and responsible for the atrocities. The systematic starvation of Soviet POWs, the executions of Jews. One source states flatly he knew everything.
Chilling.
This wasn't abstract hatred. It was a deeply ingrained central tenet that drove policy from the very top.
The beginning of World War II itself, the invasion of Poland, well documented in the sources, obviously.
Yes. September 1st, 1939. Invasion of Poland. After Germany and Russia signed that non-aggression pact in August, which shocked everyone. That invasion definitively marked the start of the war.
And initially, his military leadership was praised.
Initially, yes, he was seen as brilliant. His generals, other figures, praised him. Some even called him the greatest military commander of all time after the swift Western campaign, the fall of France.
That must have inflated his ego enormously.
You'd imagine so. This initial rapid success reinforced his self-belief and, crucially, his generals' deference. It set a very dangerous precedent for later decisions.
But then the invasion of Russia, Operation Barbarossa, that really seems to have been the turning point, didn't it?
It truly was a massive gamble. Hitler envisioned leveling Moscow, erasing its name, utter destruction.
But reality intervened.
The brutal Russian winter, fierce Soviet resistance, it proved too much. Sources describe the German army getting literally stuck in the ice and snow.
And Hitler's reaction.
He often became depressed, apparently, but stubbornly insisted victory was just a thin blanket away, clinging to illusion.
While his soldiers suffered.
Terribly. This led to widespread despair among German soldiers. They were ordered to sacrifice his life, fight to the end, often lacking basic winter equipment. It was a strategic and human catastrophe, largely of his making.
His health also deteriorated throughout the war, according to the sources. That must have impacted his leadership, surely.
Oh, indeed. The immense workload, the constant stress, the mounting worries from defeats. It destroyed Hitler's health, as one source puts it.
How so?
From the winter of 41-42 onwards, his personal physician, Dr. Morel, watched him day and night, gave him almost daily mysterious injections, glucose, vitamins, other things.
The infamous Dr. Morel.
Yes. Staff noted his shaking hands, pale appearance, premature aging. Clear symptoms of Parkinson's disease developed.
And yet he remained isolated.
Increasingly so. Interestingly, sources also note that throughout the war, Hitler never visited a bombed German city.
Yeah.
Never. Preferred to travel by train with darkened windows. It suggests a real aversion to confronting the direct devastation his war was causing. A chilling disconnect from the reality faced by ordinary Germans.
And the most significant attempt on his life, the July 20th plot. That's highlighted prominently. What was the impact of that event?
It was a desperate attempt, yeah, by a group of German officers who saw the writing on the wall. July 1944. Klaus von Stauffenberg planted a bomb at the Wolf's Lair headquarters.
But it failed.
Narrowly. Hitler survived because someone, a staff officer, moved the briefcase with the bomb behind a thick oak leg of the conference table. It deflected much of the blast.
Incredible luck, or unluck, depending on your view.
Exactly. But the failure led to brutal reprisals. More than 4,900 people were executed in the aftermath.
4,900.
Yes. And this event, it seemed to just intensify Hitler's paranoia, his belief that he was surrounded by traitors. It further isolated him in those final months.
So as the war drew to its close, April 1945, the sources paint this vivid, almost claustrophobic picture of Hitler's last days in the Führer bunker.
Yeah, the atmosphere of the bunker was one of increasing desperation. Claustrophobia is a good word. The Red Army was less than 100 kilometers from Berlin by mid-April.
Closing in fast.
Very fast. Allied bombers attacked constantly. Daylight raids by the Americans, nightly incursions by the British mosquitoes. Berlin itself was just rubble.
And Hitler retreated underground.
Moved permanently into the Führer bunker. It was a structure built in 2 levels, the second added in 43-44, designed to withstand even the most powerful bombs. A desperate last refuge.
What was it actually like inside the bunker under that intense pressure?
Well, it was relatively small. Living space was sacrificed for structural strength. Hitler had 4 small private rooms for himself.
4, okay.
And an adjacent room for Eva Braun. They shared a small bathroom. Twice a day, he'd hold these military conferences, reviewing the ever-deteriorating situation, clinging to impossible fantasy victories.
And his physical state.
Those who saw him described him as looking much older than his 56 years. Shaky hands, pale complexion, stooped posture. Couldn't control his left arm because of the Parkinson's. The physical toll of the war, his inner turmoil. It was clearly visible by then.
Eva Braun was with him right to the end. That's quite a striking contrast to his public image, isn't it?
Yes, it really is. She moved into the bunker against Hitler's initial wishes, apparently.
Really?
Yeah. Her last 2 letters, written mid-April, expressed this unwavering devotion and the tragic feeling of being there. She sounds like a very romantic young woman, much younger than him.
And her only fear was losing him.
That's what comes across. She'd even attempted suicide earlier in their relationship, apparently to keep him. She explicitly stated in her last letter, "I will stay with him."
And he kept the relationship secret.
For years, he felt that as the leader, the Führer, he couldn't have a wife. It was his duty to the nation not to, or so he claimed. This private devotion really starkly contrasts with that public, austere persona he cultivated.
His 56th birthday, April 20th, with Berlin literally collapsing around them. That sounds like a truly surreal affair.
Oh, it was described as one of the strangest birthday parties one could possibly imagine. You had high-ranking Nazis like Goering coming to congratulate him.
While hoping to leave.
Exactly. Many were desperate to get permission to leave Berlin. Earlier that same morning, Goering had blown up his own famous Hall castle to stop the Russians getting his plundered treasures.
Unbelievable.
And Hitler received a delegation of Hitler youth, some as young as 11, being sent out to defend Berlin. Kids.
Oh, God.
And Eva Braun gave him a silver-framed photo of herself, inscribed, "To my Führer from your loyal Eva." This small, unique physical object highlighted her loyalty right when others were abandoning ship.
So he chose to stay in Berlin, despite advice to flee to the supposed Alpine fortress. Why did he make that decision?
Right. Everyone urged him, go south, go to the Alpine fortress in Bavaria. There was a significant stronghold there, bunkers that didn't build. But Hitler knew it was mostly a bluff, a propaganda tactic. It had actually convinced Eisenhower to redirect American forces south, away from Berlin, which perhaps helped the Soviets.
So he knew it wasn't a real option.
He knew it was largely an illusion, and he decided he preferred to die in Berlin, in a Wagnerian Götterdämmerung, cataclysmic, mythical final battle, surrounded by his last troops. Rather than escape to an illusionary mountain hideout, he chose this dramatic, self-destructive end over pragmatic survival.
Then on April 22nd, it seems his public facade finally just cracked completely. What happened during that afternoon conference?
Yes, that seems to be the moment. During an afternoon situation conference, he suffered a profound nervous collapse. He was informed his orders for a counterattack hadn't been obeyed. Couldn't be obeyed, really.
The final straw.
Apparently. For the first time, he declared openly that the war was lost, announced he would stay in Berlin until the end, and then shoot himself.
He actually said it.
Yes. Later that day, he asked his physician, Dr. Morell again, about the most reliable method of suicide. This moment marked a clear shift to the final, grim plan. All pretense of victory was gone.
And this is when Goering, his designated successor, tries to take over. What do the sources reveal about that crucial moment? Seems like palace intrigue right at the end.
It really does. This is a critical detail, apparently from documents found by Commander Rose later. Goering learned of Hitler's admission of defeat.
Okay.
So he sent a telegram asking permission to take over the Reich's leadership as per Hitler's own 1941 decree naming him successor. Seems logical, right?
On the surface, yes.
But Martin Bormann, Goering's bitter rival, was there in the bunker. He intercepted it, or at least presented it to Hitler as an attempted coup, a power grab.
Oh, Bormann, of course.
Hitler was furious, saw it as total betrayal, immediately ordered Goering's arrest, stripped him of all his posts. It just underscores the intense paranoia and infighting, even as the Reich literally crumbled around them.
And Himmler also tried to make a separate peace deal, more betrayal in Hitler's eyes.
That happened on April 28th. Heinrich Himmler, head of the SS, he'd already left Berlin. He offered the Allies an unconditional surrender of Nazi Germany via contacts in Sweden.
Did the Allies bite?
No, it was publicly rejected by Eisenhower, broadcast on Western media. When Hitler heard this, he went into a furious rage, according to witnesses.
I can imagine.
In retaliation, he ordered the execution of SS General Hermann Feigelin, Himmler's liaison in the bunker, but also, crucially, Eva Braun's brother-in-law.
Eva Braun's brother-in-law. Did she try to stop it?
No. Apparently, Eva Braun didn't intercede, even though Feigelin was her sister's husband. She saw his attempt to flee Berlin earlier as cowardice and betrayal, too. Loyalty to Hitler trumped family ties, even then. The final days were just filled with betrayal and brutal summary justice.
And then in this almost surreal turn, Hitler marries Eva Braun, right in the middle of all this. How does that fit into his final hours?
It's bizarre, isn't it? Just hours after Feigelin's execution, early hours of April 29th, Hitler married Eva Braun in a small civil ceremony in the bunker.
Why then?
He stated it was her desire, and he wanted to reward her loyalty. Especially, he said, given the betrayals he saw all around him. Goering, Himmler.
A reward for loyalty?
Seems so. A striking contrast to his previous public stance, having only one wife, Germany. Immediately after the wedding, he dictated his political testament and his private will, ensuring his legacy, his last wishes, were recorded.
What did his final will actually say, as his 1,000-year Reich crumbled around him?
His political testament, dictated at 4 a.m. on April 29th, It expressed his desire to die with a joyful heart. He remained defiant, unrepentant, right to the very end.
No regrets.
None expressed. He reiterated his unshakable will to implement the racial laws, offered merciless resistance to the poisoners of all people's international Jewry. Same rhetoric.
Unbelievable.
He ordered that his and Eva Braun's bodies be immediately burned after their deaths. Explicitly stated he didn't want his corpse displayed, like Mussolini's had been, hung up in Milan.
Right, he wanted to avoid that humiliation.
Exactly. He left his property to the party, or the state if the party ceased to exist. With lifetime annuities for Eva Braun, though she vied with him, his sisters, and a lump sum for trusted aid. This detail just confirms his complete lack of remorse, no change in ideology, even at the very, very end.
And then on April 30th, 1945, it was finally over.
Yes. The end came that afternoon, after testing the cyanide on his dog, Blondie.
He poisoned his dog first.
Yes, to ensure the poison worked. Then Hitler said his goodbyes to his remaining staff, urged them to continue fighting, head west if possible. He and Eva Braun retreated to their private rooms around 3:00 p.m.
And then?
According to eyewitness accounts from those just outside the door, there was a gunshot. Hitler committed suicide by a gunshot to the head. Eva Braun died by cyanide poisoning.
Both methods.
He likely bit down on a cyanide capsule as he shot himself, to be certain. Their bodies were carried up to the Reich Chancellery Garden, doused in petrol, and burned immediately, just as he had instructed. The news was announced on German radio the following day, May 1st, marking the definitive end of the Third Reich.
But the story of his death, it didn't really end there, did it? Especially with the Soviets finding the bunker?
Not at all. Soviet forces discovered the bunker, and in early May, they found Hitler's and Braun's charred dental remains in the garden.
Dental remains? How could they be sure?
They were later positively identified by Hitler's dental assistant and his dental technician, who were captured. The records matched.
Proof.
Definitive proof. However, Stalin himself was apparently wary of believing Hitler was really dead. He restricted the release of information to the public, even concealed the discovery initially from Marshal Zhukov, the Soviet commander who took Berlin.
Why would Stalin do that?
Politics? Paranoia, maybe? This deliberate secrecy was a huge factor in fueling what came next.
That secrecy then led directly to decades of conspiracy theories, didn't it? Hitler escaping, living in South America.
Absolutely. Stalin's disinformation, suggesting Hitler might have flown west, escaped. It fueled what one source calls ghostly historical literature. Hundreds of books, articles, testimonies about alleged sightings, especially in Latin America, lasted for at least 30 years.
Wow.
It became a potent propaganda weapon during the Cold War, implying Hitler might have survived, maybe hidden by the Americans or British. It created this persistent, damaging myth.
But forensic evidence eventually settled the matter, right? Cutting through all that speculation.
Yes. Thank goodness for science. In 1972, and again much more recently in 2017, forensic odontologists and pathologists re-examined the dental remains held by the Russians. They definitively confirmed their authenticity, matched perfectly with wartime dental records and x-rays. They even found things like tiny plant fibers in the tartar, consistent with his known vegetarianism.
Fascinating detail.
And, crucially, they found no gunpowder residue inside the mouth fragments, which indicated he didn't die from a shot through the mouth, as some earlier theories suggested, but likely to the temple.
So the science backs up the eyewitnesses.
Pretty much. And back in West Germany, after years of investigation, interviewing 42 witnesses, a federal court officially declared Hitler dead in 1956, stating there was not the slightest doubt he had put an end to his life by means of a shot into his right temple.
And the bunker itself, what became of that chilling final location?
The bunker was eventually destroyed, blown up, filled in. The original garden of the Reich Chancellery where it stood became just a local parking lot for many years, unmarked.
Just paved over.
Essentially, yes. It wasn't until 70 years after the war that a Berlin Historical Association installed informational signs nearby, providing an accurate account of Hitler's final days in the bunker, finally acknowledging its grim history publicly on the spot.
So, stepping back from all these details, what does this deep dive into Hitler's life, from those obscure beginnings to the bunker, ultimately tell us? About history, maybe about humanity.
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, Hitler's rise, from homelessness, lacking professional training, and utter nobody really, to becoming one of the most powerful and destructive figures of the entire 20th century. It just forces you to ask an important question, doesn't it?
Which is?
What can societies learn about the specific conditions? The economic crises, the political instability, the national humiliations that allow such extreme individuals to gain power. especially when they promise easy, quick solutions during hard times and skillfully exploit existing grievances and prejudices.
It's a sobering thought, isn't it? How fragile things can be. Something for you, the listener, to definitely mull over as you reflect on this deep dive.